Wonderful. Thanks, Rami, and thanks
Yeah,
everyone
no
for
problem.
joining us today. I know everybody is so busy with their lives these days, and the fact that you've decided to take a small amount of time out of your day to join me is really wonderful, and I appreciate you being here. I also just want to start off by saying that I didn't start out my career with aspirations of being a leader or even really understanding the importance of being a leader or the role that they have in an organization. And I would say that was just my sort of my lack of awareness, early in my career. And it was really through these experiences with great and then some not so great leaders that I really started to see the impact that leaders have on the people around them and the results that they were able to achieve with their employees. And so I really believe that everyone, nobody shows up to screw up in their lives. And so many leaders just really they really just want to do their best. And yet somehow, some cases, we don't really have the tools and we don't always support our leaders in the way that we can. So again, this is why I'm really thankful that you're spending some time here with me today to learn a little bit about, your own leadership, and perhaps even that there's something that you'll take away to help you level up your own leadership journey. So there are really two outcomes that I want us to talk about today. And that is that, what is management and how do we compare that to leadership? They are really two distinct things, and yet they're very complementary. So we'll talk about what that is. And we'll also, I'll share two tools that I think are really important to have in your leadership toolkit, and that's delegation and coaching. So of course we have a small amount of time today, so I will be covering these off at a very high level, but I do hope, like I said, that you do come away with some knowledge that you can use in your day-to-day lives. So organizations today require supervisors and managers to be leaders and managers. So like I said, they're two different things, but yet they're so complementary. But the skills are different and their functions are different. So we're going to talk about that. But both are really important to help teams and organizations reach their goals. And ultimately, what we want from an organizational perspective is our leaders to have both that management function and the leadership function. And so you'll find me as we go through the day probably referring just to being a leader, but for the most part, I mean management and leadership. So it's just, I'll specify when I mean one or the other, but you'll hear me talking about leadership through most of the presentation. And the difference between leading and managing, and I like the saying, you don't manage people, you manage things, you lead people. So ultimately, a leader influences a group towards achievement of a goal, whereas a manager is responsible for the administration of the team. So management is the short range view, and that includes things such as scheduling, planning, assigning tasks, budgeting. And with this type of work, it's really easy to see if you're on track. You can measure it. Now, some examples of supervisory skills would include those technical skills. So often you are a frontline employee with great technical skills, whether that be, building widget A or, perhaps you're, project, you're leading a project and then you move into managing project managers. So you have this technical skill. There's administrative skills. So you need to be able to plan and organize and coordinate activities. You won't have to be able to work effectively with people, and you need a great, sort of a really good understanding of the organization. But all of these skills can be learned, and it just requires time and effort, determination, sometimes practice, and some tools. So supervisors are a level of management. They're the frontline managers. So you manage the individual contributors, so the frontline employees. And sometimes this role is also called a team lead. Sometimes you're actually called a coach, but you are a manager. You're just responsible for managing those frontline employees. Supervisors have a positional authority, which means that the organization has given them, the actual authority to do things like approve vacation time. And when someone moves into the supervisory position from a frontline employee, their role changes quite significantly. So when you worked as an individual contributor, you were evaluated based on the quality of your work, maybe the quantity of your work. So how much did you get done in a day and how well did you do it? Whereas when you're a supervisor, your performance is now measured based on the quality of work of the people that you're leading and that you're managing. So it's quite a different role. And a big part of this role is communication. So as a supervisor, you have a really key role in the organization in bringing information from upper management to the frontline staff, as well as you bring information from the frontline staff up to the senior management. So you're really acting as this bridge in between these two groups of people. And so really both groups, the employees and the senior leaders, need this supervisor to help them talk to each other. It's also really an important role because it's often the supervisor or the frontline leader that has more regular contact with customers and clients. So you're able to bring that information to the senior leaders as well. So while management can be thought of as a short range view, leadership is really more about that long range view. So in this case, you're focusing on development, you're influencing behavior to affect change. So it's really about influence. You may be thinking about training and giving feedback. And this is much harder to track. It's harder to know if you're making a difference in this case. So there are many definitions of leadership, but I think what's most important is that leaders influence others. They take initiative to get things done, and they lead by example. So leadership isn't necessarily a title. You may have the title of a leader, maybe it's a team lead is your title, but it's really about being a mindset, and it's a way of thinking and behaving. And you become a leader by practicing and by commitment to practicing. So you can't practice leadership in private, until you get it right. You have to practice leadership in full view of others. And I often say, to be a great leader, you have to practice in public. So today, with this fast pace of change, there's increased customer demands and changes in employee expectations. Leaders are really needed at all levels of an organization. And it doesn't require that formal title. So like I said, whether or not you're a current leader, supervisor, manager, or you're more of a frontline employee, you have an opportunity to be a leader. And organizations need leaders at all levels. So there are many skills required by managers and leaders. So some include training or mentoring, budgeting, change management, communication, team building. So I've just listed a few, and I put them into a word cloud just to, to kind of mix them up. But I wonder just if in the chat, you could add some other skills. What other skills can you think of? And then Rami, I wonder if you could share those with me.
Yes, definitely. As they come in, I will definitely share.
Excellent. Yeah, so like I said, I listed a few, just wanting to hear from others. If you can think of any other management and leadership skills. Like I said here on the slide, it's not comprehensive. Are we seeing any other skills?
Oh, yes, a bunch just came in. Collaboration.
Excellent.
Measurement and analysis. Listening, empathy.
Ah, wonderful.
Prioritization. Financial control.
Mm-hmm.
Inclusion.
Yeah. So lots of really smart audience we have today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Excellent.
Guidance, creative thinking.
Wow. Yeah. There's some really, really good ones.
Conflict resolution.
Mm-hmm. So important. Yeah. I mean, they're all important. Every one of these that you've listed.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully
Meditation.
you're, oh
Sorry.
yeah, great. Yeah, no, great. You were saying meditation was the last one?
Yeah, meditation. And then they're trickling in fun, likability, problem solving.
Awesome. Yeah, so I hope that what you're seeing by this list is this really vast, list of things that are required to be an effective leader and effective manager. And yet so many people, like I said earlier, end up in these management or leadership roles with very little training and very little support. And I guess I'm at almost 50, I'm over 50 courses now I've taught with McEwen, which, sort of mind boggling for me at some points. But, so often I hear from people that, they've been a leader for a while, or they've been a supervisor, and they just became it. And they had to figure out so many of these things on their own. And when you think about this list that we've just created together, like what an expansive list this is. So we're going to talk about two. We're only going to have an opportunity to speak about two of them. But one of the things I wanted to start off by saying is that I think that one of the most important skills that a leader needs to have is adaptability. So I think this is becoming more and more important in our day-to-day lives, regardless of whether you're a leader or not. With the pace of change that's happening, it's just increasing. And some of the data that I see is that we can expect to see more change in the next 10 years than we've seen in the last 100. So just think about that and the way that people will need to adapt as a result of this significant change that we're going to go through. So I think one of the most important skills is adaptability. And I really think, part of this skill is about it being your responsibility as a leader to adapt your approach to meet the needs of the individual team members that you're leading. So I just want to kind of pause there for a second. And it's your responsibility to adapt your approach to meet the needs of individual team members. And so in order to do this, you need to have a variety of tools in your toolbox. And then you need to know when to use that tool or when to use what tool. So to be an adaptive leader, you really need to be able to diagnose or assess an individual to determine what tool will be most helpful. And then you also need to be flexible and use a variety of different styles. So the two skills in your toolbox that we're going to talk about today are coaching and delegation. So delegation is one of many, many tools, as we talked about, in a leader's toolkit. And while delegation seems simple, many leaders struggle. Many leaders struggle with delegating. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what it means to delegate and some of the benefits of delegation. So before you delegate a task or a project to an employee, it's really important that you take careful consideration to determine if the employee will actually be set up for success with the task. We really want to build people up when we're delegating. So we should really only use delegation when an individual is already motivated and they already have skill. And so that doesn't mean that the skill can't be a new skill. It doesn't mean that it can't be something new that they're learning. But you just want to make sure that they can be successful in this task. So when delegating, you really need to provide people with autonomy. However, because you are the leader, you ultimately still have responsibility for that task. You are responsible for the result. And as I said earlier, you're now being evaluated on your ability to get work done through others. So, this means that you have to be really clear on what the expectations are, what the outcome is, perhaps on the timelines, and you need to give people the right to do it differently than you do. Right? So you have to give them the right to do it differently while still meeting those expectations that you're setting out for them. So you also want, when you're delegating to someone, to confirm what your follow-up expectations are. So do you want them checking in with you, daily? Is it weekly? And again, this will depend partly on what you're delegating. So if it's a 6-month project, perhaps every other week is enough. But if it's something that you need done by the end of tomorrow, perhaps you want them to check in more frequently. So part of the reason for doing this is to make sure that it doesn't feel like a micromanaging situation, right? You want the person that you're delegating this work to know that you believe in them and know that you believe they can be successful. You just want to make sure that you are there to support them so that they will be successful. And you also need to, for your own well-being, to have those check-ins to make sure that that things are on the right path. Okay. So a few simple steps for delegation. So when you're delegating, you need to determine, what the task or the project is. So you need to define it. And you want to really include what's the purpose, or why is this task important? And what are those outcomes that are expected? And depending on the type of task or project, and the skill of the employee, you might also want to specify the specific actions that are required. So part of defining this task is also setting a due date or a time frame of when it needs to be done by. And so this could be done by telling the person, saying, I need this done by the end of the day, Friday. Or it could be that you will ask them to say, when do you think you can get this done by? And again, this will depend on the type of task that you're delegating and the person that you're delegating it to. You also need to make a specific decision about which employee you're going to delegate the task to. So this might involve determining how important the task is. So if it's a mission critical task with a really tight deadline, you may want to delegate it to someone who's done the work before and you know that they can knock this out of the park. They can just run with it. However, if you have more time and it's perhaps not quite as mission critical, you may want to consider if someone else on your team is ready for a growth opportunity. So again, you really want to think through, who are you going to assign this task to? But regardless, like I said, you need to assign the authority, give them the right to do it differently, communicate when you're going to follow up, and what are those status updates that you want. And this really just helps to avoid those feelings of being micromanaged, and will still allow you to be confident that the task is progressing in a way that it needs to. So I'll just share a really quick story. I was working with someone not so long ago, and they thought they were fairly good at delegating. And they had an opportunity to delegate a task to someone and said, oh, if you could get this done by the end of the week, that would be great. Now, the leader ended up having some spare time and noticed that the task hadn't progressed, but they also hadn't set this follow-up schedule. And so, the leader had some spare time and decided to jump in and do the work themselves. And later on, spoke to the employee, and what they realized was that the employee was actually, a little bit upset, wondering if the leader didn't really believe in them, and was saying, well, you know what, you gave me till Friday, like I had lots of time, it wasn't going to take me very long. When really what the leader was really just trying to do was help the employee out, get some stuff done that they had time to do. But there was a little bit of a miscommunication there. So just really important that when you delegate to someone that you keep the lines of communication open and that you're clear, and, perhaps let them, once you've delegated, let them go to it, right? And do it in their own way. So just thinking about some of the benefits of delegation. And while I'm going through this slide, if you have some of your own thoughts about delegation, please, again, share them in the chat. So from a manager or leader's perspective, it's about time management. One of the things that we talk about with delegation is, do you find yourself, working late every night or working on the weekends while everybody on your team, seems to have spare time? I think very few people have spare time, but it helps you with your own time management. It frees you up to do some of the other tasks that only you can do. It can also help with succession planning. So if you're helping grow your own employees, then it can help with your succession planning. So if perhaps you have to take a holiday, or you want to take a holiday, you may have more employees that are able to step in and help out. It also gives the employee an opportunity to learn and improve skills. It helps them to feel valued, and it builds confidence. Done well, right? Delegation done well can help them build confidence. From an organizational perspective, it can also help with recruitment and retention. If people are feeling valued and they're feeling like they're contributing and they have room for growth and development, they're more likely to stay engaged in their work. So again, I just want to pause for a moment and see if you can think of any other things that are benefits of delegation. What would be some benefits of delegation that I haven't listed here? Any thoughts?
We have a few coming in. I can't keep up with them.
Excellent. Like a group that's participating. Excellent. I love it.
Yeah. It came in a little fast, so if I miss you, I apologize. Builds collaboration with the team. It keeps people from feeling burnout, faster decision making, empowering the worker to be an integral part of the process, training opportunities, cross training, spreading your leadership and performance philosophy, champion emerging leaders, fresh perspective. Okay, did I get
Yeah.
them all? Oh, there's
Oh,
more
yeah.
coming.
Excellent.
Allows different views, developing new leaders, discovering new innovative ways, uh, sharing the load. Managers can practice giving feedback.
Yeah. Wow.
Mhm.
What a list.
Yeah.
Right. So many benefits, so many benefits. And really, part of what I wanted to share with this slide is that there's benefits to everyone, right? Benefits to the organization, benefits to the employee, benefits to the manager or leader, right? So it really is this comprehensive, um, you know, set of benefits. And so you've just added some really, really great ones. So excellent. So I want to move on then and talk about coaching. And so coaching is another tool in a leader's toolkit. And I think of coaching, it's really such a fundamental leadership skill. And actually, for that matter, it's really a life skill, one that you can use to even improve your delegation skills that we just talked about. So for example, you can use your coaching skills to ensure that the person that you've delegated to really truly understands what you've asked them to do, as well as you can ask them about what their next steps are to ensure that they will meet the outcomes. So you can share your expectations. You can, set that, talk about the outcome. And depending on the skill level and the task, you may then turn and say, so what do you think your next step will be? Right. And that's a coaching question. That's a way to engage them in the process. Right. And it's a way to make sure that they are going to meet those outcomes that you need them to meet. So ultimately, coaching is a communication process, and it's used to encourage and support employees to develop and apply knowledge, improve their skills and improve their abilities. Right? So it's really a communication process to encourage learning and development. Using a coach approach is really about using these coaching skills in a conversation. So to help people improve their skills and abilities. One of the things that's, I find fascinating about coaching is that, there's really two fundamental pieces, and it requires excellent listening skills. And somebody mentioned that earlier when I asked about, leadership and management skills, somebody mentioned listening. And it also requires the use of great questions. So when we coach, we really are becoming a thinking partner, right? We're becoming a thinking partner with the person that we're coaching. And the point is to help them learn, to help them grow, to solve problems, right? So we can use coaching in all of these different ways. But there's this underlying belief when we're coaching someone that they are capable. This is really fundamental to the mindset of coaching. And it really creates a safe space, so that as leaders, we can provide feedback. We can also receive feedback, right? So it creates a safe space for that two-way feedback loop. But it's also a safe place for employees to brainstorm and develop solutions. And like I said, you're working in partnership with them, right? So it really can be quite a transformational process. The thing to keep in mind with coaching is that while I think, like I said, this is such a fundamental leadership skill, we don't want to use leadership coaching if there's corrective action that needs to be taken or if it's a remedial situation. So then we want to use some of our other skills. We may need to use direct communication when we're wanting to, when there's a remedial situation that we need to deal with. The other thing that I hear a lot of in organizations or when I work with leaders is that sometimes coaching can become an overused skill. And so we want to be careful that when we are using a coach approach or taking a coach approach, that the person that you're coaching, likely knows the answer. They may have it within them. They may not know the answer, but they do. And so, for instance, if somebody was, I am perhaps not the best baker. So let's use baking as an example. And, if I went to someone, a chef perhaps, or, bakery chef and said, I need, I want to make this, wedding cake. And they said to me, okay, well, what are all the ingredients do you think that you would need? I truly don't know the answer to that. I know some basic ones probably, but what that can do is make me lose confidence rather than build me up, right? So, if somebody was saying to me, okay, Camille, you're taking on a new change management. I work a lot in change management. You're taking on a new change management project with a different client, perhaps. And they started asking me, okay, what might be the first step? Or, maybe there's some difficult people that I need to, reach out to. I know the answers deep within me. I have ideas. They're just not there. That thinking partner will help me. But ultimately, I'm capable. Whereas in the baking example, I really just don't know. And so that can do the opposite of what we want coaching to be, right? So you just have to be careful when you use coaching and not for it not to become an overused skill. Does that make sense? I'm just going to pause for a moment and just see if we can get some reactions in the chat. Not seeing any head nodding or anything in this online environment.
We have a yes.
Okay.
So far.
Okay. So like I said, it is such a foundational skill, but just one that you want to be using carefully in the same way that you wouldn't want to delegate a task to someone who wouldn't be set up for success. So everything that we're doing from a leadership perspective is how do we help our employees be successful? That saying, be the best that they can be. All right. The other thing to note about coaching is that it really does focus on the current and future, not so much about the past. So we really want to focus on the here and now, rather than going into the past. Now, sometimes there are cases where we might say, well, how were you successful in the last case, or what did you do that helped you be successful? Those types of things are okay, but we don't want to dwell on the past. We really want to look forward and to the current time. It's also really different than mentoring and training. Coaching is different than mentoring and training. So like I said, coaching requires really deep listening. And listening is such an important part of our communication skill, and one that I think we are losing. We're losing out on. We don't practice listening as much as we maybe did in the past. So something to think about if you're practicing coaching is that if you're doing all the talking, you're not actually coaching. You may be mentoring or training or delegating, but you're not coaching. So we want to be doing more listening when we're coaching. We really want to put away all of our distractions, which I know can be so difficult, but you put away your phone, your emails, your instant messages, and you want to focus on the person that you're in partnership with. We want to use our nonverbal cues to keep focused, but without interrupting, right? So nonverbal communication skills are also a really important part. You want to be asking clarifying questions and paraphrase what you've heard to make sure that you're understanding correctly. And really, really important is that you're wanting to listen to understand, not to respond, right? Listening to understand, not to respond, which may mean that you get to the point where you have quiet time in your conversation, because you listen, you paraphrase, and then you think about what your next question may be. And so getting comfortable with that silence can be a really important part of effective listening. So the other part that I mentioned about coaching is that, we coaching questions. So we've got listening is really important, and coaching questions is the other part. So we want to focus most of our questions on what and how questions, right? Because these engage the problem-solving parts of our brain. Whereas if we ask why questions, they can sometimes cause people to become defensive. So what you'll notice if you think about this as you go about your days, and if you start to practice this, is that almost every why question can be turned into a what or how question. So a simple example here, so perhaps, I'll use a small child, and they're practicing pouring their own milk into a glass. And perhaps you're out of the room and you come in and you note that the milk's been spilled everywhere. So a natural reaction might be, why did you spill the milk? Which puts people, which could put the child, into that defensive mode. You could take that same question and say, what led to the milk spilling? Now, I mean, it's just a simple reframe, but that question puts people into more of a problem solving part of our brain rather than becoming defensive. And you know what? If that you may also, in that silly example I shared, find out that that the milk jug was too heavy, or perhaps they were fooling around and with their sibling or whatever. But it helps you get to the understanding it without placing blame. Great coaching questions also invite introspection, and they're open-ended. I just want to ask here for a moment about open-ended questions, if anybody is familiar with open-ended questions. If anybody can type into the chat what open-ended questions are.
We have some came in that say, yes, they do. A question where, oh, I'm sorry, they're coming in so quick that I'm losing them. No yes or no answers.
Right.
Questions that don't, okay, there are questions that people can't answer with a yes or no, requires a response that is not a yes or no. The question should be descriptive, or the answer should be descriptive, sorry. It allows an answer to be more descriptive or involved. Tell me more. This person has tell me more in quotations.
Right. Excellent. Yeah. Like I said, smart audience. So, really just about, coaching, we want to get into things, right? We want to invite that introspection. We want to learn, we want to explore. And so while there are times that it makes sense to ask a closed-ended question like a yes or no, we really do want to try to keep to those open-ended questions as much as possible, because that's really where the richness in the conversation can come from. So I want to share some sample questions, and perhaps you have some of your own that you'd like to add into the chat as well. So if you can think of any questions that you think might be really helpful, that would be great. I'll just share a few of the ones I have here. So how will you reach your goals? This could link to delegation, so it might not be how we reach your goals, but how will you accomplish this task? So if someone's come to you with a challenge that they have, and you're having a coaching conversation, you may say, how do you want to move forward on this? And what will get in the way? Right? So what challenges might you face, or what might get in the way? If someone's struggling, they're just not sure how to move forward, what's one decision you can make to move things forward? How will you know that you've succeeded? So how do you know that you've been successful? And what excites you about this approach? And what is it that you want to learn? So this is just a handful. It's just a small list. But again, just wondering if anybody else came up with some questions. Some questions that might be good for coaching.
We had a couple come in. What do you need from me to support you in this project? What would you most like to talk about?
Excellent. Yeah. And we had earlier, someone had mentioned, tell me more. Right.
Yeah.
So while not a question, it still falls into that coaching style of question. Tell me more. And that's digging in, like, tell me more about this. And it allows people to explore more. Yeah. And what support do you need from me? Excellent. Yeah, great. So again, what are some of the benefits? Benefits of coaching? Again, so many. It can be used to really enhance performance. It can be used to, more to increase the learning and the development. It builds confidence. Right? It builds confidence because they're coming up with the solution perhaps on their own. And it also gives buy-in. So if you tell someone, you need this task done, and you say, what steps do you think you need to take? And they're coming up with those steps, they're automatically more likely, well, they'll follow those steps because they've come up with them themselves. Whereas if you tell someone step by step by step by step how to do something, they might go away and just do it differently anyway. Now, I just want to go back to, if you're delegating to someone who hasn't done this task before, then of course you want to be very clear. So again, you have to use your adaptability that I talked about earlier, a few slides ago, to know your employees. Right? But it does build confidence, and it also creates that buy-in. Increases trust. right? Because it shows that you as a leader, respect and value their opinions and that you can have this conversation. And it supports that psychological safety I mentioned earlier, where somebody can come to you and say, I'm not really sure. And you say, okay, let's work through this together. Like, let's figure it out. What do you think? Right? So it creates that psychological safety. It also leads to reduced employee turnover, just like delegation can, increase productivity and more satisfaction with their work. So again, asking you, any other benefits that you can see from taking a coach approach?
I can read them out as they come in. I'm sure people are just typing.
Excellent. Thank you.
No worries.
So what benefits of coaching? What can you think of? Any additional?
Builds the cohesiveness of the team.
Great.
Builds trust.
Absolutely.
Could promote cross-learning between coach and coachee.
Absolutely, yes. And just because we're leaders or managers doesn't mean that we know everything. Absolutely.
Creates an open line of communication and approachability. Leads to they're moving quickly. Leads to understanding of your team members, feels more collaborative, allows out-of-the-box thinking to have a better outcome.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, so many benefits to coaching. And so I just want to move on then to talk, we've been talking about effective communication. And really effective communication boils down to both parties involved or all parties involved having that same understanding of the information being communicated. Right? So we have this mutual understanding. So communication is a fundamental leadership skill, and it involves listening and speaking, questioning, these nonverbal cues, and writing, of course, even writing. We spend so much of our time these days doing written communication. And so I want to encourage you through this, to absolutely do your written communication, but also have those conversations, right? Have the conversations with people. So you may have noticed that in both tools, both delegation and in coaching, effective communication is required. Right? And if you think back to that list that we created of leadership and management skills, communication was probably fundamental to many of them. Communication is so fundamental. So if being able to be effective in your communication will help improve your coaching and your delegation, all of the other skills that we talked about, and ultimately will improve your own leadership. So in terms of what's next, just wondering about one takeaway from today. So what's a takeaway that you have from today? And how will you incorporate this knowledge, your one takeaway, into your day? How will you use this information that I've shared with you today in your day, in your work, in your personal lives? Just wondering if anybody is willing to add into the chat. And again, if you wouldn't mind sharing, Rami.
Ask less why questions.
Ask less why questions, great, and replace those with how and what. And if you, as you go about your day, you'll notice that you can convert why questions to how and what. Excellent.
Being more conscious of the questions I ask. Exactly as you said, use how and what questions. You need to remind others of these truisms because we are under pressure. Okay, being more transparent. Oh, they're moving very quickly. Sorry, everyone.
Yeah.
A much better way of conducting coaching sessions. More tools in my belt to utilize as needed. Make sure I listen more than talk. As leaders, it's our job to understand how we can support employees to be their best. Taking a break before speaking. Practice active listening skills. Clear expectations, processes, accountability. Listen attentively and hear what is being said. Being at peace with delegating more. This is a very active crowd. It's great.
Yeah. No, I absolutely love it. And I'm sure it's difficult to catch all of them, but yeah, just some really great takeaways. And I think, one of the things that I said earlier that I'll just share again is that that concept of, really it's about practicing in public. So I really encourage you to try something new and see how it goes for you, and see what works best. And you'll probably find that, there are some, you know, standard questions perhaps that can, you have in, sort of on the ready. So when you get into different situations, you can start with these ones that are just there and ready to go, and practice new ones as you get comfortable with the ones that are your standard questions. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Excellent. Okay. So just then to say thank you. We'll have some time for questions and answers, but just want to thank you again. And, if you want to learn more, some of the material that I've pulled and shared with you today comes from the Management and Supervision certificate. It also comes from the Leadership certificate. And there's just a number of really great courses in here that goes into a lot more detail than what we've been able to cover in the last, I don't know, say 45 minutes. So again, just thank you for your time and happy to answer questions.